Hi, and welcome to another STEAM Sundays video. I'm Heather Rivardi, one of the conservators at the Mac Lab. We're super excited to bring this interview to you that we did recently virtually with Mr. McWorthington, a dendrochronologist who has worked with us on a number of projects in the past. Mick is the principal at his company, the Oxford Tree Ring Laboratory, and he's worked on projects both in the UK and in the US. We hope that you enjoy this video and that you learned something from it. I certainly did. Please feel free to like or leave questions that you might have for us in the lab or for McWorthington in the comments, and we will hopefully get to those as soon as we can. And thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy.
Tree ring dating is a scientific technique for dating wood. And what it basically works out from is every year in a temperate climate, a tree puts one ring on. And I'm sure you've seen, if you've been in the woods, you've seen a tree stump and you've counted the rings. And if you count 20 rings, the tree's 20 years old. If you count 70 rings, it's 70 years old. The thing you probably didn't know was that those annual rings are different sizes. So if you looked at them very closely, you get very wide ones, you get very narrow ones. The wide ones are when you've got a climate which is warm and wet, and a narrow ring is a drought year. And over a long period of time, that becomes unique sequence. And if you have two trees growing in a similar area, they will both pick that sequence up. And if you were to draw a graph of both sets of the widths of those tree rings, they would be very similar. So that's the basis of dendrochronology, and how we use it is, if you now think of, if you cut that tree down and you looked at those tree rings and you looked at the very outside ring, because you cut it down, you know the date of it, 2020 at the moment. So if you write 2020 on that piece of wood, and then the ring behind that would be 2019, 18, 17, 16, and back. And basically what you get is a sequence of dated rings. So now if you go into the woodland and say you found a fence post, and you cut that down as well, measure the rings in that, you could compare that against your chronology that you've got out of your trees, and it would match because the tree grew, the fence post grew in the same woodland as the trees you cut down, and they also picked up the same climate signal, so it should match. So let's say when you did the match, your fence line was matched it 70 years back. You assign your date across, it would make it 1950. The other thing you have to remember is the majority of the things that we're looking at are made with hand tools. So rather than seasoning the wood is used straight away. Because if you leave a tree to dry for a couple of years, the amount of work to make a log or a chair suddenly gets 10 times the amount. So what you do is you use the tree straight away. So with dendrochronology, when we're doing a building, shall we say, we know that building was built within 6 months of the year to the date of when the tree was felled. In England, there's no degree. You can't do a degree course in dendrochronology. There just isn't one. So I actually trained as an engineer, and I didn't like electrical engineering, which was what the big thing was when I was at college, which was to do. All the engineers were training to be electrical engineers, not heavy industrial engineers, which is where I come from. My family comes from that industry, and that's what I like, big machines. So rather than get a job in industry, I got a job in a museum that did industrial stuff. Like, it was called the Ironbridge Gorge Museum, big industrial place. And I went there with the archaeologists, and I'd be looking at old industrial sites, looking at it as an engineer, saying, how does this machine work? What did it do? How was it powered? But a lot of that is empty buildings, because the machine may have gone, but the building's still there. So you're looking at the building a lot. So it was a natural progression from that. I'm in the building. How did it work? What's the date of it? How can I find that out? The wood. So that's basically how I got into dendrochronology. What happened was I was doing buildings, a lot of buildings. And one day I was doing a project where I was working with a dendrochronologist. I'd been asked to come in and record the building while the dendrochronologist was doing sampling. And basically he was taking a long time, so I helped him. So I started taking samples with him. We got the job done. We're out of there. And a few months later, he said, do you want to learn how to do this? So I went and started working with him for a while. And then I got really, really lucky or unlucky, depending on which side of the story you look at it. A lady got ill who was a dendrochronologist in England. And English Heritage, which is our national organization for preservation, panicked because they hadn't got anybody who could do dendrochronology all of a sudden. They lost a person. And I had already done a lot of building work, basically not quite an architect historian, but I've done a lot of recording on buildings. And I was a scientist because I've done engineering, and I was doing dendrochronology. So basically I got a grant from them to go to Oxford. And there I basically did a lot of different projects through the university doing dendrochronology on their fabulous buildings they have there. The Bodleian, the Radcliffe Camera, which is this really strange, it's a library building, it's part of the Bodleian Library, and it has this really sort of wonderful domed roof on it. So I went up there with some of the students from Oxford University, and we basically did dendrochronology in there. And the great thing about that is, because the university is, it keeps records, and we basically had all the records of that building being built. So we could date it, we could see how long the building, we could see the date of dendrochronology, we could see when the building was opened, and we could work out how long that building took to build. And we could also see how it was changed during the building of it, because they were a bit ambitious with that dome. It basically failed, so they had to redesign it. That was cool. And just being up there, it's a fabulous building. Yeah. So if you're doing a building, so a lot of my work is standing structures. That's the majority of my work. So I'll go in there, I'll look around every single piece of wood in the building. First thing I'm looking for, is it original to that building? Is it not, make sure it's not reused, make sure it's not a repair, make sure it's original to the construction of that building. Also understand the development of that building. You know, is it just one building? Has it got a wing on the back? Work out what's original. And then I'll take 6 to 10 samples using a special coring bit. And hopefully they will have, as many of those samples have complete sapwood, and hopefully all the samples will have more than 50 annual rings, and hopefully they'll all be the same species of wood. So that's what I'm looking for. And those samples I take to the lab, sand them up, measure them under a microscope, and then do some magic on them and get some dates. Cool. That's one. So this is 2 from a building I did the other day. I've mounted it onto a piece of wood, so when I'm sanding it, I don't lose the end of my fingernails. But they're basically about the thickness of a bit bigger than the thickness of a pencil. So these are the cores that I use. We do big sections as well. You know, we do things like that as well. But obviously, this is a building that this has been taken out of the building by somebody else. We don't cut big lumps of building like this out, the building will fall down. We take little cores, but if a carpenter's there and is taking big chunks of wood out, I'm the first person looking for that stuff. I start measure basically when you look very closely at the wood, you can, after you've sanded it, you can clearly see every single ring. So the idea is I measure every single ring, starting from the middle, working towards the outside. I'm trying to get a nice clean sequence. I'm looking for any sort of problems in the wood and staying away from them. And you get this nice sort of sequence, which you then compare with all the other samples you get from the same building. And if they match, like I said about the graphs matching, if you can get them all to match together, you make a master chronology with that, and then you compare that with your data chronologies. And that can be local chronologies, local buildings, any data that you have in that area. The Radcliffe camera, I've done some fabulous builds. I did the Tower of London in London, the White Tower there. I did that. That was a pretty phenomenal building. It took us 2 years. They were doing a big restoration project, and we'd go in every couple of months, take samples out of what had just been exposed, and then we produced a huge report. I've done cathedrals like Salisbury, Winchester Cathedral. But I've also done great things over here. I did Mount Vernon. That's an important building of yours. I remember that one. But that one was a good one because it was a slightly different story, because the idea was to go in there and how old is the building? But working with the architect historians there, we soon realized that when you looked at the wood, the building that's in front of you, there's actually another building inside of it. Right. Dated that. So if you go in the basement, you can see, if you look up, you can see floor plates, bottom plates, big 12-inch square pieces of wood that don't fit the building above you, don't fit the floor plan, they're in the wrong place. When we sampled them, they came out to 1732 or something. And basically it was George Washington's father's house. So when we think of George Washington's house, it actually started as his dad's house. He didn't demolish the original house. He kept that, and it's inside the house that we have today. So that was a cool project.